Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. All right, man, so I appreciate you guys rolling by. As you guys do know, we are in the U.S. Championships right now. Just checking real quick. Wesley is, let me see. He is still tied for first with Sam Sevier and Alexander Linderman. Okay, so they're doing good right there. Bam. All right, so, yes, I do have that round 8 game for you between Sam Shankland and Wesley. So, something I'll mention, I did put a tweak to the thumbnail. I actually was able to kind of put a little board. I'm going to try my best to try to fit a little board in there so it kind of seems a little more interesting of a thumbnail. And hopefully, you know, anybody who might not be clicking on my videos might do so because they'll see the chessboard, so they'll think chess. Maybe I think some people, you know, they might not know that my videos are chess videos. I don't know. It's worth a try. I'm going to see how it goes. I might just, you know, keep it, but it is going to be kind of hard for me to get it, you know, in that specific little space all the time because sometimes the names are longer, stuff like that. So anyways, for all my people in the Philippines, I will say mabuhay. Kamusta na aking kaibigan, magandang umaga. It is still morning time. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. But yes, if you guys are ready to go, I have spoken enough. Let's go ahead and see what we have for this game. So we do have e4. We got e5, knight to f3. Knight comes to c6. We see bishop to b5, and then we do have knight to f6. And this is the Ruy Lopez Berlin defense. As you guys know, this is something that Vladimir Kramnik played against Garry Kasparov in their 2000 match. And it is a very, very hard wall to break down. So, you know, there are many different options when you get in this position, but we do see castles in this game, and not to worry, you are not dropping this pawn on e4. Knight takes e4, and then you have two moves that you can really play. You have d4, or you have rook to e1. You also can play queen to e2. Those are going to be by far the most logical. You know, you can always take on, you know, take on this square as well with the knight. So, you know, you have a lot of different options to get your pawn back. So we do see d4 in this game. Knight comes back to d6. We see bishop takes c6. We see pawn takes c6. Pawn takes e5. Knight goes to f5. Queen takes on d8 with check, and this forces the king to take on d8. We do see knight to c3. We have bishop to e7. Rook swings over to d1 with check. We see king over to e8. And even though it looks like black is, you know, kind of messed up because, you know, it kind of looks like, you know, this rook isn't going to get out. This rook isn't going to get out. This bishop is kind of stuck. You know, this does end up being a really nice game for black. The major thing that you have to think about is the fact that there are no queens on the board. Since there are no queens on the board, that means that the attacking chances and the tactics are a lot, you know, greatly reduced. So it's just a little bit easier game to play. We do see g4, hyper aggressive. Knight comes to h4. We see knight takes h4, bishop takes h4, and then we do have f3, you know, helping, you know, our pawn out on g4. And what black is trying to do, you know, they do have the king in the center, but they are trying to open this area of the board to try to activate this rook. That is definitely one of the things you can try to do because right now this rook is not being used, so you have to try to activate it. So we do see h5. We got h3 trying to protect. Pawn takes g4, pawn takes d4, and we do have f6. And like I said, black is just constantly trying to break the position down, create some weak pawns in white's position, so that way, you know, you can start getting some attack going, especially if you can kind of get this bishop activated along this diagonal, swing this rook over, maybe step the king up. You might have a little something. We do see pawn takes f6, and this is the novelty of the game. You know, this is what we have seen before. I believe it's one game in the database where you have seen bishop to f4. Just prepared to take back here, which with a nice little double attack. But like I said, we do see pawn takes f6. Pawn takes f6, and then we do now see bishop to f4, and we are eyeballing this square. And true to form, black is continuing to attack white with the move f5. And basically, they're not going to have a whole lot left over once the position gets broken down. So as I always say, you know, when you are in a situation, especially when it's in front of your king, you know, anywhere in this area here, you know, if your opponent is trying to open a position, try the best you can to close a position. It's not always going to be, you know, perfectly the case, but it is usually going to help there'd be a lot less lines open for your opponent's pieces. So we do see G5 in this position, and then we see rook to H5, and this is kind of double attacking this pawn. So that is the only drawback, but we actually have a really nice move here, and it is knight down to E2. And then we actually see bishop to E6. Some of you guys might be wondering, like, well, why wasn't the pawn taken? Because, you know, you take here with check, right? Something like that, right? Well, after we see knight to E2, there's actually like a nice little move that's present in the position. And so if we were to take with the bishop on G5 here, we would actually be seeing the move knight to G3. Now, you're not losing. It's not like you're doing like really horribly, but, you know, you are probably going to have to give up the exchange if you don't want to lose some material. So we would see rook down to H3. The king would come up to G2. We see bishop take F4, king takes H3, and then king down to E7. And you are going to be activating your pieces. But like I said, you are down in exchange and you're only up a pawn for that exchange. Other than this, you're just losing an entire piece. So definitely bishop to E6 is a much better move. We do see king up to G2. And this was the position that you guys saw in the thumbnail. This is definitely something new for me that I'm doing, like the little picture of the board and stuff like that. So hopefully I get some interesting positions and, you know, kind of put it up and it looks interesting and people click on it and stuff like that. So appreciate that very much if you clicked because of the thumbnail. So king comes to F7. We do see knight over to G3, and something kind of has to give here. So we do see bishop takes G3, king takes G3. We see rook A to H8. And I mean, you know, we have taken over this file completely. So, you know, the black king is in kind of a little bit of a box. So we do see king down to F2. Rook comes to H4. We see bishop taking C7, and then we do see F4. And now we have just successfully blocked this bishop out of the control of this square here. And also, we have made it impossible for this king to come to either one of these two squares. So it is getting a little bit dicey for white here. So we do have rook to G1, and rook to G1 was one of the few moves that gave you know, somewhat of anything for white, because, you know, black was actually just doing very, very great, you know, if we didn't make this rook to G1 move. So the king does come down to G6. We see rook A to D1. Rook comes to A2 with check. And then this is where rook to G1 comes into play. We are blocking this check now, and we're not having to try to, like, you know, shimmy over anywhere. And do the Shankland shuffle. A couple years ago, Sam Shankland was playing in the U.S. Championships. I believe it was 2 years ago, 2019. And he actually did like F3 and then king to F2. You had to be there, man. Like, it was funny. Like, you know, Yasser Sirwan and you know, Maurice Ashley, where they were both like making a joke about it. It was funny. So rook does take G2, king takes G2, and we do have king taking G5. Rook comes up to D4. We see bishop taking A2, and then we do see bishop taking F4 with check. Now, if we back up, you know, the bishop, you know, the trapping of the bishop is not relevant in this particular case. You know, if you were to play G3, because you actually have bishop to B1. And that is one of the things when you do have these three pawns over here or even over here. If you were to take on one of these A or H pawns, usually you have a king in the vicinity that can trap the bishop, and you don't have it in this position. So this is not the same type of blunder that you see. So bishop takes F4 with check. We see king to F5. We see bishop down to G3. Bishop comes back to D5. We see bishop to F4 or rook to F4 with check. King goes back to G6. We see rook to G4 with check. King goes back to F7, and then we see rook to H4, offering a rook trade. We see rook takes H4, bishop takes H4, and then we do see B5. And for a little bit of an in-game quiz for you, you know, I have actually reached a position that if you do want to pause the video and see what in-game idea Sam Shankland employs in this position, go ahead and do so. Okay, cool. So any of you guys that have been around since the beginning of my YouTube, they know that I started off doing, like, you know, showing how to set the board up and like different types of checkmates and how like pawns move and things like that. So I have a lot of beginner videos And I will actually put a card up here if you're not familiar with this concept, but it is actually what they call a pawn freeze. It's basically just when one pawn in an in-game comes up against two pawns, and it pretty much makes it really hard for those pawns to be pushed. And so if you guessed it, you would have at least some good little in-game knowledge, and this move is B4. And so the issue that black actually has in this particular position, even though it's dead even, I mean, it's still dead even, but in a lot of different positions, this can actually be very cramping because it's very, very hard now for you to push this pawn without it just being immediately taken. You know, and then also you don't have the ability to move this pawn 2 spaces because you'll be taking here and then, you know, you're going to be getting somewhat of a favorable endgame. Of course, with the bishops, especially with it, you know, protecting this particular square, you know, it's going to be kind of hard for you to win because, you know, bishop in games are hard to win. But, you know, this is a very useful concept in games. So you see, like I said, this pawn is freezing these two pawns. And like I said, I'll put a card up there so that you can have reference to the video if you do so happen to want to go and hear what I had to say about that particular in-game technique. So we do see king to e6 in this position. The bishop comes down to f2. We have a6. So like I said before, I mean, these pawns are pretty much stuck in this position, and this one pawn is doing a really good job of preventing like the advancement of pawns. So especially when you get into an endgame and you want to try to restrict somebody's movements and try to give yourself some tempi, you know, this move, you know, this type of an in-game concept technique is very, very beneficial for you. So if you did guess b4, then you're a gangster, and I'm afraid of you. But we do see bishop to d4. Bishop comes down to a2. We see king over to f2. We see bishop back to d5. King goes to g2. Bishop comes back to c4. We see king to f2. Bishop comes back to d5. And then we do see king to g2. And we have reached, I believe it is, let me see. Yes. Here. 2, 3. Okay. Yes, we have reached a draw by threefold repetition. I always have to check and see if maybe it's a agreed upon draw or if it's a threefold repetition. So this position has been seen 3 times. And like I said, I mean, there's not really a good chance for you to really just push any pawns. This pawn is not going any further than this square. And these pawns are not moving at all. So it's a very stuck position, and it is a draw. So, like I said, Wesley So does have 5 points with Sam Sevion and Alexander Lenderman. So it is going to come down to these last few games, you know, who's able to kind of get a couple of wins and put themselves into clear first. So we will see if Malaka C. Wesley So, if he is able to get the U.S. championships for the 2nd year in a row and be in a very small class of players who have been able to do so. So I appreciate you guys very much. Maraming salamat aking kaibigan po sa nanonood. Makito tayo mamaya. And I will see everybody next time.